All right, welcome back everyone to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving headfirst into a really intriguing book, Eric Infanti's The Human Firewall, Bridging UX and Cybersecurity to Maximize Cyber Resilience.
That's right, and I have to say, I was excited to see this one on the list for today.
Yeah, me too. It's a title that really gets you thinking. I mean, it's all about how we can really combine user experience design, that's UX, with cybersecurity, right? To kind of create those stronger, more resilient systems that, honestly, we all want to be using. And that's exactly what we're going to dig into today.
And right out of the gate, Infanti really grabs your attention with this problem, right? He talks about how even with all the cutting-edge security technology out there, think firewalls, AI, all that a staggering 95% of successful cyber attacks actually involve some form of human error.
95%. That's a huge number, isn't it? It really makes you stop and think about where we should be putting our focus. Where are we really vulnerable?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. We often tend to think about cybersecurity in terms of these impenetrable digital fortresses, right? But Infanti kind of flips that script. He's saying, hey, instead of looking at users as the weak link, what if we actually saw them as this untapped line of defense?
A complete shift in perspective.
Exactly. And to illustrate this idea, he uses this really fascinating symbol, the Ouroboros. That ancient image of a serpent or a dragon eating its own tail.
Okay, I'll admit, when I first saw that in the book, I was like, okay, where are we going with this?
Yeah.
So help me out here. How does this ancient symbol actually connect to user experience in cybersecurity? What's the link Infanti's making?
Right. Well, let's break it down. The Ouroboros, it's really about this constant cycle of renewal. And in the world of UX design, that's pretty familiar territory. I mean, you design an interface, users start using it, and then you get that feedback, right? Maybe some parts are confusing, or maybe some things just aren't working the way people expected. And then what? It's back to the drawing board, back to redesigning, back to improving the design. It's that constant cycle of making things better based on how people are actually using it.
So it's never really finished, is it? There's always room to make the user experience smoother and more intuitive based on how people are actually interacting with the system.
You got it. And cybersecurity, well, it has its own version of this cycle of renewal, right? Think about it. A system gets breached. And then what happens? We analyze what went wrong. Where were the weak points? Where did the attackers get through? Then you go into strengthening those defenses, updating protocols, maybe implementing new training programs to help users avoid those same pitfalls in the future. It's that reactive process, learning and adapting from those incidents to become more resilient. And that's exactly what the Ouroboros represents, that consuming and being reborn stronger each time.
I like that. And I can see how, let's say, after a company experiences a big data breach, they scramble, right? Mm-hmm. Updating their systems, retraining their people, almost like that reactive renewal you're talking about, driven by a pretty painful event.
Yeah, exactly. And that's just one layer of what the Ouroboros brings to the table. You also have that unity of opposites it symbolizes, and that's a big part of what Infanti is getting at.
Okay, unity of opposites. That sounds intriguing. What's that all about?
Well, think about it. UX design is all about usability, right? Making things easy, seamless for the user. And cybersecurity, often it's seen as adding those layers of, friction, those security measures that sometimes can make things a little less convenient, right?
So they're at odds.
Well, Infanti would argue, and I totally agree, that it's a mistake to see them as these opposing forces. They're not mutually exclusive. In fact, they need each other.
Okay, explain that a bit more. How can they work together?
Sure. Imagine a super secure system, right? It's locked down tight, but nobody can figure out how to use it. What good is that? On the flip side, picture a beautifully designed system, super user-friendly, but it's got security holes everywhere. That's just asking for trouble, right?
Right. You're just making it easier for the bad guys to get in.
Exactly. And the Ouroboros shows us that these seemingly opposite goals, usability and security, they're actually interconnected, right? You need both for a system to really be successful and resilient in the long run.
Okay, so you're saying balance is key.
100%. And there are tons of practical examples of this. Let's take password reset flows. UX designers want it to be as easy as possible, right? Just a couple of clicks and you're done. But security, they need verification steps. And a balance approach. Well, you might use multi-factor authentication during the reset process. It might add a few more steps, sure, but it makes it way more secure. And it's still relatively user-friendly.
Right, making it a little harder for someone to just hijack your account.
Yeah.
So we've got that cycle of renewal, that unity of opposites. The Ouroboros also represents self-sustaining systems. How does Infanti bring that into the picture?
Now we're talking about being proactive, not just reacting to problems, but actually building systems that can, in a sense, take care of themselves, be more resilient from the ground up.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Right. In cybersecurity, this is where we see things like adaptive security. Think about AI-driven systems that can actually learn your normal login behavior, right? So it
Okay.
knows you usually log in from your home computer during the day. Then, let's say someone tries to access your account from a different country in the middle of the night. What happens?
Red flag?
Exactly. The system can automatically flag it as suspicious and ask for extra verification, all without needing someone from the security team to constantly monitor everything. It's like the system is learning and responding in real time based on your behavior.
So it's almost like having a security guard who's always watching, learning your routines, and knowing when something's off.
That's a great way to put it. And then there's self-healing design for when those inevitable breaches do happen, because let's face it, they still can.
Yeah.
Imagine a system that can actually restore files and functionality after, say, a ransomware attack. Instead of this long manual process of recovering data, the system can sort of heal itself, right? Minimizing downtime, minimizing data loss.
So to some degree, it can fix itself?
Exactly. And importantly, this idea of a self-sustaining system, it also involves the user. Infanti calls it user-centered sustainability. It's about empowering users to be a part of the security solution through education, through clear interfaces, making them active participants.
Not just passive recipients of security rules, but active players.
Right. Think about phishing awareness training, right? Instead of throwing a bunch of technical jargon at people, you give them streamlined, easy-to-understand tutorials. They learn to spot those red flags of a phishing attempt and know what to do if they see one. By educating users and giving them those clear, usable security tools, you're making them a vital part of that human firewall.
Okay, now we're talking about the psychology of the Ouroboros. This is where it gets really interesting. What can we learn about Infanti's perspective from that angle?
Right, so Infanti digs into this Jungian concept of facing the shadow. For UX designers, that shadow might be the urge to just go for those super sleek aesthetics or make things ultra convenient, even if it means creating usability issues for some users or even compromising security. They need to be aware of that and find that balance between what looks good and what's truly robust and secure for everyone.
So they need to recognize those potential blind spots,
Yeah.
right? Those design choices that could unintentionally lead to vulnerabilities.
Absolutely. And for cybersecurity professionals, the shadow might be that deep-seated fear that if they make security measures too user-friendly, they're somehow weakening them. It's about embracing those user-centered design principles, overcoming that fear, and realizing that security can be both strong and accessible.
Sounds like a mental shift is needed on both sides.
100%. And then you've got the idea of transformation through feedback that the Ouroboros embodies. Just like that serpent consumes itself to create something new, both UX and cybersecurity, they thrive on learning from failures, from understanding user behavior.
So when something goes wrong, it's not a sign of defeat, but an opportunity to learn.
Exactly. When a security feature is always confusing users, or when people keep falling for the same social engineering tricks, that feedback is gold. It's not about pointing fingers. It's about saying, okay, how can we make this better? And that leads to what Infanti calls iterative growth. With each cycle of feedback and improvement, the system gets stronger, more effective.
So it's that continuous loop of improvement, like those software updates we all get on our phones and computers.
You got it. And that brings us back to the core of Infanti's argument, that need for balance and unity in design that the Ouroboros represents so well.
And it really does seem like the perfect symbol for that.
Right. That circular shape of the Ouroboros, it really emphasizes that need for balance between UX and security. It's not about one taking over the other. It's about them working together in harmony from the very beginning of the design process.
So you're talking about collaborative design, right? Where UX designers and cybersecurity folks aren't just working in their own separate silos.
Exactly. They're involved in those discussions, those decisions right from the get-go. So security isn't just an afterthought, something you bolt on at the end. It's baked into the design from the ground up.
It becomes part of the DNA of the system.
Right. A great example is something like biometric authentication. Using your fingerprint or Face ID to log into an app. It's simple, quick, and it provides a really strong layer of protection against unauthorized access. It's a win-win.
A perfect example of where good UX and strong security aren't at odds. They're actually enhancing each other.
And to really get this right, you need what Infanti calls a unity in vision. across the whole organization. It's not just about individual teams collaborating, it's about leadership, the company culture, embracing that idea that security and usability, they're everyone's responsibility. Security isn't just the IT department's problem, and usability isn't just the design team's concern. Everyone plays a role in building these systems that are both secure and user-centered.
It's like building a house, right?
Yeah.
You've got the architects focused on making it beautiful and functional, and you've got the structural engineers making sure it's strong and safe. If they don't talk to each other from the start, you might end up with a gorgeous balcony that's about to collapse, or a fortress that nobody can stand to live in.
Yeah, perfect analogy. So, what are some of the biggest takeaways from the Ouroboros as it relates to Infanti's ideas?
Yeah, what should we really be walking away with here?
Well, first and foremost is that idea of continuous renewal, right? Just like that Ouroboros constantly consuming and being reborn, security and usability, they're ongoing processes. They're not static, set it and forget it kind of things. There's always room for improvement. There's always feedback to learn from. And those threats, those vulnerabilities, they're constantly evolving too, right? So we got to be adapting. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
A mindset of constant learning and improvement.
Exactly. And then there's the power of balance and integration, right? Those seemingly opposite forces, usability and security, they can not only coexist, but actually make each other stronger when they're brought together in the design process from the very beginning. And finally, there's the lesson of adaptation and growth. It's about seeing challenges, whether they're security breaches or usability problems, as opportunities. Opportunities to learn, to adapt, and to innovate.
Turning setbacks into stepping stones. Now, getting back to Infanti's book, The Human Firewall, it's clear he's really focused on bridging that gap between usability and security. Can you talk a bit about those core arguments he makes right from the introduction?
Absolutely. Right out of the gate, Infanti makes this bold statement. He says, and I quote, "Technology doesn't fail people, design fails people." It's a really powerful way to challenge that tendency to just blame users when those security breaches happen.
And it circles back to that 95% statistic, right? That it's not just about user error, it's about design flaws.
You got it. He digs into that historical separation of UX and cybersecurity, how those two fields have often worked in complete isolation. UX teams focus on making things smooth and satisfying for users, while cybersecurity teams are laser-focused on preventing those attacks, often without really considering how those security measures impact the user. And Infanti argues that this siloed approach, it's had some pretty big negative consequences, you know? It's contributed to those very human errors that are at the root of so many breaches.
So it's not just about building a strong security system, it's about building one that people can actually use effectively and securely.
Right. And that's why he keeps coming back to that 95% statistic, because many of those errors, those breaches, they're happening because of poor design that doesn't really guide users towards secure behaviors, you know?
Making it harder for people to do the right thing.
Exactly. And the core mission of the Human Firewall, as Infanti lays it out, is to unite those two worlds, UX and cybersecurity. It's about shifting that perspective to the idea that users can actually be the strongest line of defense, but only when they're equipped with well-designed, secure systems that really empower them to make safe choices.
Empowering the user, not just blaming them when something goes wrong.
100%. And the book digs into some key areas like strategies for designing systems that actually prevent human error in the first place, you know, proactive stuff. He talks about using principles of behavioral psychology to nudge people toward those secure actions, almost subconsciously, building trust by being transparent about security measures and how they work, and of course fostering that crucial collaboration between UX and cybersecurity teams from the very beginning.
So it's about making security user-friendly without compromising its effectiveness.
Exactly. And Infanti really highlights the high stakes, that erosion of trust that happens every time there's a breach, the damage it does. He's calling for this fundamentally different, more human-centered approach, right? Building a more resilient digital world, not just through tech, but through thoughtful design, you know, design that considers those human factors from the ground up.
Proactive rather than just reactive.
Exactly. Now, the book is structured in these different sections, and the first one, it makes sense, focuses on understanding the problem.
Laying the groundwork.
Right. And in this section, he really goes deep into exploring those root causes of security failures, you know? It's
Wow.
about going beyond just saying, oh, the user messed up, and actually looking at those systemic issues, those design flaws that often contribute to those failures.
Okay, so he's saying we need to examine how those systems themselves might be influencing user behavior.
Exactly. And he directly addresses that whole idea of usability versus security. that, there are these two opposing forces that are always fighting each other. You're saying, nope, that's a myth. They're actually interconnected. They depend on each other. And he breaks down the very real costs of neglecting user experience and security. And it goes beyond just, the money lost when a breach happens. He's talking about the damage to a company's reputation, the frustration users feel when security measures are clunky and annoying. And ultimately, that increased vulnerability that comes from systems that are just too difficult or confusing for people to use securely.
It's a call to action for companies to prioritize UX as part of their security strategy, not just an afterthought.
Exactly. And Infanti, he frames this whole first section as a call to empathy and action. He's urging us to really see things from the user's point of view, understand their motivations, their limitations, how they behave in the real world. He's saying that to really tackle this problem of human error in cybersecurity, we need to move beyond just those purely technical solutions. We got to factor in the human element.
The human element. It keeps coming back to that.
It does, right. And he reminds us that humans were both a potential vulnerability and this huge asset in security. We need to understand both sides of that coin. And he offers real-world examples of how usability and security, they can work together, like those password managers that make it easier to use strong, unique passwords for every site, or adaptive multi-factor authentication that steps up security when it senses something's fishy, but without constantly bugging you for extra verification when you're just going about your normal routine.
Okay, so he's not just talking about the problems. He's offering concrete solutions, showing how those seemingly opposing forces can work together.
Absolutely. And he uses these real-world case studies, those big data breaches we've all heard about, to really show the consequences of ignoring user experience in those secure systems. So this first section, it's really about shifting our mindset, recognizing that understanding the problem from that human-centered perspective, that's the foundation for building those truly effective, sustainable security solutions.
It lays that groundwork for a more effective approach, an approach that actually works for people, not just against them.
Yeah, exactly. And that leads right into Chapter 1, the human factor in cybersecurity.
Which is where the rubber really meets the road.
Right. In this chapter, Infanti really hammers home the point that cybersecurity, it's about people, even more so than those machines and the tech we use, right? He brings back that 95% statistic, but he's framing it not as blaming users, but as a critique of how we design systems. It's like he's saying, hey, those failures, those breaches, they're often a design problem, not a user problem. And the goal of this chapter is to understand why users behave the way they do and how good design can actually guide them toward those secure actions.
So instead of seeing users as the weakest link, he's saying they can be a powerful part of the solution.
Exactly. And he gets into those common human errors that lead to breaches, falling for those increasingly clever phishing scams, using weak passwords, ignoring security warnings, things like that. And his point is, those errors, they're often not just because someone's being careless, they're often happening because of how systems are designed.
So we're setting people up to fail sometimes.
Right. And the attackers, those bad guys, they know this, right? They're exploiting those human weaknesses, those psychological patterns. Think about our fear of missing out, right? That's why those urgent subject lines in phishing emails are so effective. We're wired to pay attention to those. Or our tendency to trust authority figures. That's why scammers often pretend to be from banks or government agencies.
Playing on our instincts.
Exactly. And to really drive home the impact of these design failures, Infanti brings up some really well-known case studies. He talks about the Target breach back in 2013, where phishing emails targeted a vendor, ultimately leading to millions of credit card numbers being stolen. And he points out that weak security training for those vendors, lack of clear procedures, those played a role in that breach.
So it wasn't just a technology failure, it was a human failure too.
Absolutely. He also talks about the Equifax breach in 2017, which was caused by a combination of poorly designed internal systems and unpatched software, showing how even those internal UX failures, things that might seem minor, can have these huge external security consequences. And then he talks about those everyday phishing attacks that we're all bombarded with, He points out that those security warnings, those pop-ups that are often so technical and intrusive, they're often just ignored.
Right, because they're confusing and annoying. Sometimes they even interrupt what you're trying to do, so you just click through them without really thinking about it.
Exactly. But the takeaway here, and Infanti makes this clear, is that the human element in cybersecurity, it's not a weakness to be eliminated, It's an opportunity to be understood and honestly embraced. It's about empathy. It's about seeing things from the user's perspective and transforming them from being seen as that weak link to being an active part of the solution. That's that human firewall he's talking about in the book's title.
turning them from a potential target into an active defender.
Exactly. And understanding that human element, it's just the first step. We need to start designing systems that are both secure and user-friendly. That's what the rest of the book really dives into. So understanding those human factors, it's crucial for building those truly secure systems that actually work in the real world.
Well, this has been an incredibly insightful deep dive into Eric Infanti's The Human Firewall. It's clear that bridging that gap between UX and cybersecurity, taking that user-centered approach, it's absolutely essential in today's digital world.
I couldn't agree more. The Ouroboros, the way Infanti uses it, it's such a powerful metaphor. It captures that constant need for improvement in both UX and cybersecurity, the fact that they actually need each other to be effective, and the importance of designing those self-sustaining systems that really keep the user front and center.
So to wrap things up, here's a question for our listeners. Take a moment to think about all those digital systems you use every day. Do they actually help you be secure, or do they make it harder without you even realizing it? How can you apply those principles we've talked about today, both at work and in your personal life, to become a stronger part of that human firewall?
Food for thought, right. Because at the end of the day, security in this digital age, it's not just about technology, it's about people. And we all have a role to play in making those digital spaces safer and more trustworthy. And that starts with prioritizing both security and the user experience in everything we do online.
A great place to leave it. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive today.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll catch you next time.
See ya.